Trusted, credible, nonpartisan. The Hill's unbiased news and analysis on policy and politics is delivered straight to the halls of Congress with unparalleled engagement in the Beltway and beyond. A new administration, a new Congress, and a new position on the energy and the environment. From enterprise reporting to breaking news to live events, The Hill stays on the pulse of what's next. Welcome to The Hill's Energy and Environment Summit.
Please welcome to the stage Bill Salmon, Senior Vice President of Editorial Content at The Hill.
Thank you so much. Good morning and welcome to The Hill's Energy and Environment Summit. I am Bill Salmon. I'm the SVP of Editorial Content at The Hill. And I'm understandably proud of our nonpartisan coverage, which hopefully you'll get a chance to see here firsthand today. You know, it's been, I think, 107 days since President Trump, on his first day in office, signed an executive order titled Unleashing American Energy. And in the 107 days that have ensued, he's done a lot of other stuff, too, when it comes to energy and environment. Let me just read a partial list here. Declared a national emergency, exited the Paris agreements, established a National Energy Dominance Council, reduced regulations on emissions, reduced subsidies for alternative energy sources, and of course ramped up fossil fuel production, also known as drill baby drill. I haven't even mentioned the tariffs and a lot of other stuff, but I think the question before us today is, what do all of these things taken together mean for the future of America's energy outlook? And what do they mean? What is their impact on the global climate governance landscape, if you will? These are complicated questions. Fortunately for all of us today, we have just the right mix of lawmakers and energy experts and environmental specialists to make sense of it all. Now, we also have some very important movers and shakers in this room today. So I would simply ask if you, and some of us I'm sure are expecting very important phone calls at various times, if you could please put your phones on silent mode. And if you do need to leave the room for whatever reason before our first scheduled coffee break, of course, if you could do that between our sessions and also being mindful of the fact that we are going to be live streaming this to tens of thousands of people who I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome now. So if you're watching on our live stream, if you're here in the audience, you can follow along on social media with the hashtag #TheHillEnergy. And I would be remiss at this point if I didn't thank our sponsor, Climate Power, for their generous support in making today's program possible. You know, today's interviews are going to be moderated by a couple of folks, including my old pal, Mike Viqueira, who is the DC Bureau Chief of NewsNation, as well as Rachel Frazen, who is the Hill's Energy and Environment reporter. By the way, Rachel and another Hill reporter, Sharon Udison, recently published a book on forever chemicals called Poisoning the Well. So congrats to the authors, Rachel and Sharon. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Mike Viqueira. Some people call him Mike, some people call him Vic. I call him a great guy and an even greater journalist. So let's show some love for Mike Viqueira.
Oh, hi, Bill.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, thanks very much, Bill, and thanks to all of you for being here in this beautiful, ornate setting. I was just told outside the Mayflower Hotel celebrating 100 years this year. So that's thrilling for a local Washingtonian, such as I am. You just heard Bill sort of run down the climate environment, political and policy environment that we're in right now. And we do have some very relevant and heavy hitter speakers here and some influential people that we're going to be chatting with over the course of this morning. Wildfires are getting deadlier, costlier, thanks to climate change. EPA shifts, these are some of the headlines, incidentally, from the Hill newspaper this morning. And we do still put out a print version of this paper when Congress is in, maybe a couple of times a week. Some of the headlines: wildfires getting deadlier and costlier thanks to climate change. EPA shifts scientists towards approving new chemicals and hints at future staff cuts is another article you'll find here. And 5 ways Trump reshaped energy and environment policy in his first 100 days, some issues I know that many of you are intimately familiar with. But anyway, I encourage you to pick up the Hill or go online and read some of these articles. So in his address to the joint session of Congress that we heard just recently and Bill referred to, President Trump vowed to rapidly ramp up fossil fuel and mineral production, all as he promised with that now familiar refrain of drill, baby, drill. And I remember when I was covering the House 20 years ago, a man named Mike Pence led sort of a rump takeover. Republicans on the floor during a recess chanting drill, baby, drill, and they refused to leave, I think for days on end. So this is a now familiar policy goal, a familiar refrain from Republicans. But let's hear directly from the president himself.
A major focus of our fight to defeat inflation is rapidly reducing the cost of energy. The previous administration cut the number of new oil and gas leases by 95%, slowed pipeline construction to a halt, and closed more than 100 power plants. We are opening up many of those power plants right now. And frankly, we have never seen anything like it. That's why on my first day in office, I declared a national energy emergency. As you've heard me say many times, we have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth, and by far. And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it. It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
So that sets the stage for policy and politics as we embark on this morning of discussion about some of the issues that I know are very near and dear to all of you. So without further ado, please welcome Congressman Randy Weber. The congressman is a Republican from Texas. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where he's vice chair of the Subcommittee on Energy, if I have that right, and on the Science Committee, where you're chairman of the Subcommittee on Energy. Congressman, welcome. You can climb up here? All right. Good to see you. Well, Congressman, there's a lot to talk about. Loving these boots. What are they made of?
Alligator.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Now, your district is south of Houston in that area.
It is.
Pearland?
Pearland.
Pearland, I'm sorry.
That's all right. You're from the north.
I'm from the DMV, yeah.
Absolutely. You can always tell a Texan, you just can't tell him much. But I'm the upper Gulf Coast of Texas. We start at the Louisiana line, that other foreign country. And we go down the curve, 4 counties. We have 7 ports, Mike. We got more than any other member of Congress. Some have 4. We have 7. Just a little background about the district. We produce 65% of the nation's jet fuel, 80% of the nation's military-grade fuel, about 20% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. My 7 ports don't include the Port of Houston. If you go up to the Galveston Bay, how many of y'all been to Galveston? Some of y'all been to. We want y'all to come back and spend lots of money.
Yeah.
But if you include the Port of Houston, which comes up to Galveston,
sure.
It's 8 ports. Now it's like 40% of the nation's gasoline east of the Rockies. It's still 80% of the nation's military-grade fuel, and it's 75 to 80% of the nation's LNG. So we are energy.
Energy. You're also trade with those ports as well.
We are.
Yeah,
sure.
So the Energy and Commerce Committee is the right place for you to be.
Well, I think so.
Yeah, and there's a lot on the table these days heading into the session.
I haven't heard.
Yeah, especially heading in the next couple of weeks when the big, beautiful bill, quote unquote, is being considered. A lot of implications for your district and districts around the country,
sure.
as well as with the president's policies, and let's get into that right now. Let's start with how you would evaluate the last 3 months, major policy shifts, major shifts in politics on energy and environment.
Well, America moves on energy. Am I done?
Yeah, that's your out cue.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman.
You're very welcome. So America moves on energy. Now, our enemies across the world, they don't care about standards for pollution or air quality or none of that kind of stuff. We do. I think Republicans get beat up sometimes because they think you don't care about the climate or you don't care. That's not true. I've got 3 kids. Where's Rachel? Rachel, where'd you land? I was talking to her earlier. I was telling them I've got 3 kids. She's back over here. I'm surprised she'll admit she knows me. We've got 3 kids, all girls except 2 boys. And you'll catch that later. And
sorry.
8 grandkids and 2 great-granddaughters. We want a clean environment. We want pollution-free as much as possible. But we've also got to produce energy for Americans. Everything, oil, petroleum, basically everything you touch or use, notebooks, boots included, they all have a lot of petroleum background to them, okay? Our enemies across the world don't care about that. They're going to produce oil at the cheapest they can, whether it affects the economy, whether it affects their pollution or their children, they don't care. We care in America. I'm a grandfather, we care. So it's important to us what we're doing. Produce that energy, produce it cleanly. We've got to get where we have enough energy that we don't rely on Russia. We can talk about uranium too, for that matter. Where we don't rely on Venezuela, where we produce all of our energy here.
You often highlight the importance, as you sort of just touched on then, of reliable and affordable energy. How do you balance that with growing concerns about another thing you just touched on? Well, I'm not sure if you would stipulate to climate-driven weather events and the need for long-term environmental resilience.
Everybody, I think, is really, they ought to be cognizant of and thinking about a clean environment. And I'm not a meteorologist, but that you hear what these guys talk about. They had an ice age back, glaciers were melting 20,000 years ago, whatever it is.
Right.
So I don't know. Yogi Berra once said, the problem with predicting is you're dealing with the future. So will the ice be melting again? Will we see sea level rise? Will we see storms more and more and more? Will they subside in 6 years, 10 years, 30 years, 150 years? Who knows? All we know now is the present now, where we can produce that energy the cleanest that we possibly can, keeping in mind that there's enemies out there that would love to kill us, literally love to kill us.
Clean energy. Give me an example of clean energy in your mind.
Well, clean energy for us, of course, EVs are good. Now you're seeing the tax
EVs
credits.
are good.
EVs are absolutely, they're good. You betcha. EVs are good. They're going to have to start paying some more tax because, for one thing, they had credits, where they got rebates.
Sure.
They don't pay a gasoline tax. Some of y'all may not have thought about that. I'm told they have heavier rubber tires, which means more wear and tear on the highway.
They're heavier cars overall.
They're heavier cars, absolutely. When I was on Transportation Infrastructure Committee, we talked about a bill to increase the number of vehicles that those big 18-wheelers could carry to include EVs, which weigh more, so that they could get more into the car dealerships at a cheaper, lower rate without having to have another 18-wheeler on the highway, more expulsion of gases, for example. So that's one way, EVs. When you want clean energy, natural gas is clean energy. And folks, nuclear is clean energy. I was in the Texas House for 4 years before I got demoted to Congress, and I had South Texas Nuclear Project in my district there in Matagorda County. I have been there in 2010 with staff and watched them change out spent nuclear fuel rods with our own eyes. It's fascinating to see what they do. They can do it cleanly, they can do it safely. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no cleaner energy than nuclear energy, okay? And it's reliable. Solar's not, wind is not near as reliable as nuclear. It's been 30 years since a new nuclear plant, Vogtle,
right,
has been done. We have 2 in Texas, Comanche Peak and South Texas Nuclear Project. STP was in the process of getting units 3 and 4 on the board with the NRC when Fukushima happened in Japan in 2011. Mm-hmm. And their investors drew back, from Japan and decided not to go with units 3 and 4. Clean energy is just that. It is wind, it is solar. Some of y'all know Texas is the #1 wind energy state in the country. The #1 solar panel state in the country. I was in the Texas House when we spent, I think it was $8 billion to move power lines, transmission lines from West Texas down to the grid, into the grid, so that we could have wind energy. The Texas legislature was very, very futuristic in that regard.
I'm going to drill down on what's on the table in these coming weeks. This is a big, important bill, this reconciliation bill, what the president calls this big, beautiful bill. And some of the policy goals that Republicans have And I realize, like Democrats, Republicans aren't completely unified on some of what
I hadn't heard.
what's going to be happening over the course of the last weeks, but it's going to have impacts, across American society, across the American economy. You've championed, for example, modernizing pipeline infrastructure through the Next Generation Pipeline R&D Act. What gaps in our current energy transport systems and supply chains, if you will, are most urgently in need of renovation and reform?
Well, permitting is number one. There's no LNG, like LNG people said, companies would come into our office there here in DC and say that they could build an LNG plant, whether it's 3 billion, 7 billion, 12 billion, in about 2 to 3 years. It would take them to get the permit, sometimes 5 or 6 years, and their investors get really nervous. And what happens to the price of money the longer you have to hold on to it? It goes up. Pardon me. So that affects the price, for example. You remember the Keystone Pipeline. I'll give you an example. I talked about 18-wheelers on the highway.
Yeah.
The Keystone Pipeline, which, and I talked to President Obama, to his credit, when he came into office 2009. Actually, I came in 2012 when he was reelected. He came, to his credit, he came and spoke at the Republican conference. I got to meet him personally and introduced myself to him, thanked him for being there. Said, look, you're thinking about the Keystone Pipeline. It comes into my district and the Gulf Coast of Texas. We'd love to see that permit, get approved. And he says, well, I'm thinking about it. Of course, ultimately, he did not approve it. It carries 830,000 barrels of product a day, oil. If you used an 18-wheeler, a tanker, some of y'all have seen, we see tankers on the highway all the time in Texas, a big 18-wheeler long tank, 7,000 gallons or 9,000 gallons, it depends on which one it is. If you wanted to carry that many barrels of oil a day, it would take 5,000 tankers on the highway every day to match the Keystone Pipeline. Don't we care about diesel exhausts? So we want pipeline permitting reformed. We want it as quickly as possible.
All right, let me ask you this then. Is that something that Congress has to get done or the president can do through executive order?
Well, it depends on how it's done. I think a lot of these, you're seeing him combine some of these things with the Department of Energy.
Because there was an EO on permitting reform.
Say that again?
There was an executive order on permitting.
There was. You're seeing him combine some of these agencies in doing that. If he can reduce those times, if it doesn't violate any of our laws that we've passed, if he can get it done that quickly, sure, absolutely, let's get that done. Time is of the essence. We've got a $36 trillion plus deficit. How many of y'all could operate, at home if you had, choose a number, $1 million deficit and you were having to pay your charge card interest on it at 20%? You wouldn't last very long.
Just taking a step back and look at the bigger picture, what are you're on the Energy Commerce Committee, you're on the Science Committee and the Subcommittee Chair on Energy. What are your top legislative priorities in the short term here and in the longer term?
Well, energy is number one, pipeline research. Excuse me. Pipelines so that we get them a lot cleaner, safer, more efficient, and quicker so we can move product around. And then, of course, people are trying to say we're trying to do away with Medicaid and Medicare. That's not correct. Texas is one of the few states, I forget there was 8 or 10 of them, that didn't take Medicaid expansion under Obama. And so what we're seeing is that there are some able-bodied young male adults that are on Medicaid who ought to be out getting a job or ought to be going into the exchanges. There's no reason the federal government should be sending money to the states to pay for somebody, and I don't mean to be sexist about it, it can be able-bodied young females as well, who just want to be on Medicaid because they don't want to have to pay for their health insurance. I've got kids, I've got grandkids, did I mention that we pay for our own health insurance? And so the states need to be more responsible. We need to trim Medicaid. I happen to know a FBI agent very up close and personal, and he works in the financial service. He says the American public would be unbelievably upset if they found out all the waste, fraud, and abuse that's in Medicaid, and Medicare for that matter, but we're just talking Medicaid. So you're seeing us talk about cutting back 1% maybe. Now, this is all up in the air. We're tasked with $880 billion with the B dollars.
On Energy and Commerce.
On Energy and Commerce Committee. And so we're meeting regularly, sometimes to 8 and 9 o'clock at night to have that discussion. Ways and Means is waiting on us because there's some overlap there. Right. They want to see what we're going to do.
Well, I don't want to get too far off topic, but this very day there was going to be a markup in Energy and Commerce that was originally scheduled. What happened?
It got pulled.
And why was that?
Well, we're not far enough down the road.
Yeah.
And there's some disagreement. Look, I mean, Republicans have disagreements too. And, you know, we try not to have them, you know, vile, if you will, name calling and, you know, hair pulling and all that kind of stuff out in public. But we have disagreements on about how to get there. So we're working on that.
Okay. The administration, we talked about a little bit about the EOs, the executive orders aimed at preempting state-level climate change initiatives. What do you make of that, and what role should the federal government play over state authority when setting some of these regulations on energy and environment?
Have you read the 10th Amendment?
Yes.
Okay. All power is not delegated to the United States government should go to the state.
Right. But yet the president is issuing these from the federal level.
Oh, sure, I get that, because he feels like they've done a big number on energy. Did I mention America runs on energy? And
You have indeed.
Cleaner,
Yes.
sooner, more cost-effective energy. So I think that it really goes back to, I'll go back to the second question, the one we just visited about Medicaid.
Yes.
You know, states can make their laws, regulations for Medicaid. I think states can make their laws too. If California wants to say you can't buy gasoline vehicles anymore after a while, that's up to California. They don't want to affect their, you know, climate, so to speak. If Texas wants to do that, they can do it. So let the states determine what they want to do as much as humanly possible. Otherwise, we're paying money to regulate states that the states ought to be doing themselves.
How does Texas's energy economy shape your I mean, you've already outlined the extensive links and ties that your district has to energy. How does the economy shape your approach to national energy policy, and what can other states learn from that?
Oh, that's a loaded question. As I said earlier, you can always tell a Texan. You know, I think we get it right. You know, Texas' economy is so big that if we were a country, we'd be the 8th largest country. And California's, in full disclosure, is big too. They're bigger than we are.
I think they're 7. Or I might have that wrong.
No, I think it's 4th. I heard the other day.
All right.
I'm getting a lot of head shakes here. Yeah. So usually I get eye rolls. So head shakes is a lot better. Yeah. But I think, you know, what Texas has learned, and, you know, Texas is a big state. Alaska likes to brag that the 3 Texas would fit inside Alaska. I guess that's their call to fame. But we have every single weather phenomenon there is. We have hurricanes, tornadoes, sandstorms, snow, ice. What am I missing? Some small earthquakes. And so Texas is very much aware of their weather, reforms, anything they want to do for weather programs. I think other states could say, look, you can produce things cleanly. If really, and I know this is a little bit hokey, if you give people their head, they used to say, if there's any ranchers here, give a horse its head. If you let people try to do the right thing, for the most part, they're going to do it. They're going to figure out and do the right thing. If the federal government steps in the way and tries to regulate them, then they're going to want more money. I think Texas has enough freedom behind it in the way that it came to be as a state, that they pretty much let industry do the things. You know, the Environmental Reg Committee I was on when I was in the Texas House, TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, is Texas's branch, if you will, or model after, not model, but after the EPA. They let Texas companies do as much as possible. They don't go out there and slap big fines on them. They don't go out there and tell them you can't do this, and it's going to be 2 or 3 years before you can do this. They work efficiently and effectively. Let the government, when it comes to energy, if you're a state, you want to follow Texas, work efficiently and quickly as possible. People will do the right things for the most part.
You have supported in the past bipartisan legislation, R&D legislation. So where do you see opportunities moving forward? You know, it's become almost a cliche, sort of a bitter cliche, that Washington is more polarized than ever, and certainly it is polarized. Mm-hmm. But where do you see opportunities for Republicans and Democrats to work together on many of these issues?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Some of y'all probably know who Aspen Institute is.
Sure.
Get some more head shakes. Mm-hmm. So we've been in many meetings with Aspen Institute, and just recently we were over in Italy, and we had 17 members of Congress. We had 9 Democrats and 8 Republicans. Have I got that math right? 17 members. And so we're working together on energy. We're seeing a lot of getting together on these kinds of regulations. Now, in full disclosure, a lot of the Democrats don't like President Trump's methods. You know, they don't like what he's doing with executive orders, for example. But in terms of energy and knowing which way we need to move and head that way, we're getting some collaboration.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes left, so I want to go through the lightning round.
Okay.
If I could. All right, so if you had a magic wand, if you had a silver bullet, whatever, take your pick, pixie dust.
Sure.
Cut through all the red tape, cut through all the politics to pass one energy-related bill tomorrow, what would it be?
Well, it would be a big bill. So, how many of these do you want to cover? But we need to be, Germany learned about nuclear the hard way. France reprocesses their nuclear waste more than we do. We could do the same thing. We could use an all of the above bill, which says, look, make the permitting good, whether it's nuclear, whether it's wind, solar, whether no matter what the source is, natural gas. Let's make sure that the permitting is streamlined. Let's make sure that it's clean as much as possible. Give these companies, as the old Texas horse saying, their head, as I said earlier, because they'll go out there and do the right thing. We will monitor it. We'll make sure that there's no cheating, for example. We don't want them doing things, trying to cover things up that affect our environment, that they give, employees a good, solid job, good pay. Not that we have the right to set standards and pay in Texas. We don't have a lot of unions in Texas. Mm-hmm. Pretty much let those companies choose their rate and prevailing wage. And listen, while we're on that subject, a kid can come out of high school, 18, 19 years old, and where we have all these refineries and stuff, they can go into work for those refineries. No drug history, no drug record. They can be with some secondary post-education, some a little bit. They can be making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. Throw in some overtime, they can make $100,000 a year, a kid. All the benefits, insurance, paid vacations, retirement. A kid fresh out of high school, $100,000 a year. That's a good salary.
All right, a final question. I want to bring it back to the people that you represent in Pearland and elsewhere.
Right.
What do you hear from constituents about some of these issues? On energy, are they more concerned about affordability, jobs, climate impacts, or reliability on the energy supply?
Well, you're missing one thing. I don't hear a lot of unhappiness. I hear some concern. Texas is a big energy state. There's a shock, And so we're hearing people that, look, we're appreciating all the move to get energy more affordable, and let's get it going as quickly as we can, including nuclear. Tariffs is what I've heard more about.
Really?
We want to be sure that, and look, we know what the goal here is. We don't want China to be able to charge us stuff so that high tariffs so that we buy their products, but they don't buy their products.
Sure.
And look, how many of y'all were around when Walmart started, 60s or so, 70s? They used to have a slogan. Walmart's slogan was made in the USA. Have y'all remember that slogan? Some of y'all remember that. You don't see that anymore. And so tariffs has been probably more the thing they're concerned about. But I think President Trump is onto this. He knows exactly what to do. He's going to force those countries to come to the table, and let's have a negotiation, and let's get this back on track.
Well, Congressman Weber, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.